Hey everyone, welcome back to Whittle Reads. There were loads of videos that I was thinking about possibly making, but the one that I just couldn't stop thinking about was just having a bit of a chat about this book, Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin, which is... I can't call this video a review because I love this book so much that I just have no way to be unbiased, and I really haven't brought anything to criticize because there's nothing I can see to criticize. You know, I'm sure there's something in here, and I'm sure better people than me can bring forward some interesting points, but I just wanted to talk about why it's so good. One thing to say about this book is that it is definitely hard sci-fi, and what I mean by hard sci-fi is it's got all the very stereotypical sci-fi traits. It takes place on a different planet to our own, in the distant future, different galaxy potentially, with technology that we do not currently possess. It has all those elements, but the problem is a lot of books that do go that way are often really alienating to the reader. Often they throw in all these words, names of planets and people and races and things, and kind of expect you just to catch up and just to work it all out. They very rarely hold your hand and tell you what's going on. And this book doesn't either, but what it does do is make all of those things work for it, not against it. And the way it does this is through its protagonist. The protagonist, Gentry I, is a foreigner to this world, an ambassador making first contact. So they are trying to deal with all of these issues at the same time as the reader. So you don't feel like an idiot. You don't feel stupid for not understanding these things. And a lot of the point of this book is how difficult those things are. What I mean by this is, for example, there's a conversation in this book where the foreign ambassador from Offworld is talking to a local politician, and they are trying to have a conversation about trying to convince everybody that he's telling the truth and he is coming from Offworld, because he's trying to get them all to join up with this united council of human planets. And it seems like the local politician is working against him, and you see how frustrated he gets, trying to work this out and sort them out and trying to be on the same page. But you then see it later on from the politician's perspective, and what you see is they're both trying to get the same thing. They are both trying to work for each other, but because their cultural backgrounds are so different, they just, even though they're speaking the same language, find it so difficult to communicate with each other and get the same point across that they never know that they're on the same side. You know, that's the early part of the book, so later on I'm not going to say what happens there. But the point of this book is it tells you things that you're not really meant to understand, and it's meant to show how those things can really get in the way of communication. And what makes that book, what makes that element so good is what makes this book good, in that she has built a society in ways that few other books have, in that you really do feel like a visitor to this foreign world. The element that I haven't even come close to addressing yet, which is probably the main element of this book, is that the species of human on this planet do not have sex. When I say as in they do not have a sex, they do not have a gender, they are neutral, except for 5 days out of the month where they become either male or female at random, and it can change from month to month. And so what this book does brilliantly, it doesn't do what Orwell did with 1984 or Animal Farm and just do this massive direct criticism, which is fair, but not very subtle, and it's not very literary, to be honest. But what Ursula Le Guin does is she just introduces this counterexample. She just constructs society without gender or sex, because they're just not an element of it. And it's not trying to she's not going out of her way to contrast things. Just all the elements in our society that are gendered are gone, because they wouldn't make any sense here. And so it's just a beautiful counterexample to our society, rather than a criticism or a deep analysis of our society. And I feel like it's far more effective. It makes me listen. It makes me, like, I think about these things a lot. And even then, from reading this book, there were so many elements that I was like, I just couldn't comprehend that is what they would look like if you took out gender, but it just makes perfect sense when you read them in this form. When it comes to actual direct criticism, there is one chapter in the whole book, which is potentially my favorite chapter. I don't tab books very often, but there were just a few points in this book where I was compelled to. And one of the chapters it's the only chapter in the entire book that is from a female perspective, and I think it is Ursula Le Guin writing herself in. And it's just this one very brief chapter from the perspective of a female off-worlder who had a look at this world but hadn't made contact. and does make some really incredible feminist points about the nature of things like war. And that's really the only like really clear-cut example of what makes this book feminist literature. And one of the best things about this book is that you don't have to really pay attention to that if you don't want to. And whilst I really think you should, and whilst I found that one of my favorite elements, there's so much in this book that you could not even pay attention to 2 or 3 of the elements or the points being put forward and still have so much to talk about. And that really puts me on to my next point, which is what I really want to talk about, is just how Ursula Le Guin doesn't do what so many other authors do and just put a thin veneer on our current society. Like, one of the biggest hallmarks of science fiction is Foundation by Isaac Asimov, where it really does seem just like white guys from the 50s talking around in their dinner coats, except they have flying, they've got flying cars and spaceships. It really doesn't feel like that foreigner world. Meanwhile, Ursula Le Guin puts a genderless species on a really inhospitable planet and just lets them run. It feels like a simulation. It feels like she just put in those elements and just let the species run its course for a few thousand years and is now just documenting what she found. And that's, again, what I said before. It feels like tourism. It feels like I'm just stepping into this foreign place. I feel like someone from the 1700s reading a book about, East Asia, somewhere they've never been and will never see because getting there would just be impossible. This feels like a documentary, while still having a brilliant plot and being so compelling a read. Because you have, 2 different competing nations, and so there's political elements in it as well, but they are not direct copies of political situations on Earth, because they do not arise without gendered people. And there's a religion in this world that is very, if I had to correlate it with anything, I'd say Zen Buddhism, but even then it just makes points that are so different from even that. It just feels like it doesn't feel built. It feels grown. It feels like you're just stepping into shoes for a while. It's not like someone's writing this. It's just happening. And you just happen to be along for the ride. And I loved being along for the ride. If you are looking to get into hard sci-fi, if you're looking for a book that makes some really great philosophical points, this is the book to go for. It really is. Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, competing for one of my favorite books of all time, and something I cannot recommend enough. Please, if you have the opportunity and it's something that might interest you, please do give it a read. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next